Hi, my name is David Olson, and my presentation is entitled Overnight with Frank Lloyd Wright. No, I never spent a night with the man, nor did I ever meet him in person, and I don't claim to be a real expert, but I've had a fair amount of exposure to Wright's architecture, having visited more than 100 of his homes and other structures. So here goes. Perhaps most of you through the years have discovered that you can meet someone casually on the street, at a party or at church, some other place, who makes an immediate impression. But it's when you spend more time with that person that you really learn a lot about him or her, for better or worse. It's the same with Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. You really need to spend some time getting acquainted, perhaps through an overnight adventure. That's what I did on 3 different occasions. My interest in Frank Lloyd Wright began when I was a child living in Wisconsin, about 50 miles from Wright's Taliesin home and studio. I'd hear about Wright from time to time, not always in the most favorable way. He was known sometimes for being less than honorable in his financial dealings, and his unusual architecture left some people scratching their heads. What on earth was this man thinking, designing such unusual houses? But my earliest encounter with Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture was whenever our family would go to Richland Center, where Wright himself was born in 1867. We'd go there to visit relatives or do some shopping. We'd often drive past the A.D. German warehouse, which he designed, and I'd look up and marvel at the unique structure with its concrete frieze. I knew it was something special. Incidentally, this amazing building from 1921 is now being stabilized and carefully restored as finances become available. After moving to Berwyn, Illinois in 1996, I soon became involved with the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust in Oak Park, serving as an interpreter and giving tours for 11 years. Then for 9 years I worked in the retail shop, not only selling merchandise, but more enjoyably talking to customers from around the world and sharing my enthusiasm for Wright's architecture. My intended 3 years suddenly grew to 20. I guess you could say I was hooked. Nearly everyone living in the Chicago area is aware of the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright. Many have visited Wright's home and studio in Oak Park or Unity Temple, or Roby House in Hyde Park. Perhaps even toured the Hertley House in Oak Park during the Wright Plus House Walk. Whatever your opinion of Wright's architecture may be, it could be enhanced by actually spending a night or two in a Wright house and experiencing it firsthand. There are, in fact, 12 different Wright houses that are available for nightly rental. They include the Bach House in Chicago, the Epstein House, the Meyer House, and the Palmer House in Michigan, the Davis House in Indiana, a house built only 26 years ago in Hawaii, the Duncan House, which was dismantled and moved from Lisle, Illinois to Pennsylvania, the Penfield House in Ohio, the Kinney House, and the Schwartz House in Wisconsin. They range from $250 to $795 a night, the higher figure being for the Hawaiian house that holds up to 6 people. I wish I could say that I've spent a night in each of these, but they are a bit pricey and I could never afford that much splurging. However, I have visited many Wright houses and stayed at only 3 Frank Lloyd Wright houses through the years. All 3 are what he called Usonian houses, designed for middle-income clients in a uniquely American style. I'd like to share some pictures and personal experiences from those sites. The first one is the Seth Peterson Cottage at Lake Delton, Wisconsin, near Wisconsin Dells. The Seth Peterson Cottage was completed in 1959 after Peterson advanced $5,000 to a 90-year-old Wright to design a small cottage for him. Wright at first wasn't really interested, but he spent the money and finally gave in and designed the 880 square foot structure. It was one of Wright's final commissions and by far his smallest residential design. Unfortunately, Seth Peterson never lived in the cottage as he committed suicide before it was finished. For many years, the cottage was unoccupied and in a deteriorating condition, including a partial roof collapse. But a conservancy group was formed and it was finally restored in the 1990s and made available for overnight lodging. It can accommodate up to 4 people. 25 years ago, I decided to take my mother, Myrtle Olson, to the Seth Peterson cottage near Lake Delton, Wisconsin, for her 76th birthday in the middle of January. It was a cold winter day with sleet and ice as we drove from Mom's home in Richland Center to the cottage, a distance of about 45 miles. Normally, the conservancy that manages the site rents for a 2-night minimum, but in slow seasons and midweeks, sometimes 1 night is allowed. I think then that the cost was $200.01 per night. Now, no more about that 1 cent later. After our arrival, we checked out the efficient layout of the small cottage with everything compact and convenient. As we entered, we passed the small kitchen and utility area, the dining room, and entered a large living room that occupies more than half of the house with a big fireplace, and then we checked out the bedroom and bathroom. It was small but felt comfortable and cozy, yet not claustrophobic at all. On our way to the cottage, with the roads getting a little bit slippery, my mother had suggested that we should stop and get at least a can of soup and some bread in case we couldn't go out for dinner that night. However, I didn't think that was very appropriate for her 76th birthday. In spite of slippery conditions, I drove very cautiously about 5 miles to an even more popular but less peaceful destination, the Ho-Chunk Casino, for the all-you-can-eat buffet. I mentioned to the waiter that it was my mom's birthday, so he brought her a lovely piece of cake. She was too full to eat it then, so she took it with her as we went into the casino for a few minutes of playing the slot machines. Soon we were headed back to the cottage for the night, when my mother exclaimed, "Oh, I forgot that cake by the slot machine." So I turned around and drove back to Ho-Chunk, and we found a man smoking a cigarette while he played that slot machine. My mother, who was normally soft-spoken and reserved, marched up and said, "This is my cake," and snatched it away. The man didn't blink an eye. He wasn't there for cake after all. We drove back on the icy roads to our overnight lodging, where I parked the car facing the cottage. Big mistake. On the icy surface, the car slowly began creeping toward the house. I had visions of my car destroying this house so shortly after it had been restored. My 76-year-old mother volunteered, "I'll get out and push." I said, "No, you won't." I got out and found a chunk of firewood to put under the tires to avert the potential disaster. It worked. Once in the cottage, we decided to start a fire in the fireplace. It was impossible to know which way the flue was open, and at first I guessed wrong. So we managed to smoke up the place pretty well. Then I caught on and opened the flue properly. So we got a cozy fire started and smoke finally went up the chimney. Mom found a comfortable spot in front of the fireplace on that cold, icy night, put her feet up and read the paper, probably looking for garage sales, one of her favorite pastimes. We eventually went to bed, Mom in her small bedroom, and me on the fold-out couch in the living room. In the middle of the night, I had to visit the bathroom and dreaded walking barefoot on that cold flagstone floor. However, I was pleasantly surprised by a warm floor with radiant heat pipes built in for efficiency and comfort, something Wright often did for his cold climate homes. Next morning, we got up and prepared a little breakfast in the tiny kitchen with food we'd brought along. The kitchen was well furnished with cooking utensils, dishes, and flatware. We sat at the built-in table to eat and plan our day. It had warmed up overnight, and thankfully most of the ice had melted. In the daylight, we were able to enjoy the feeling of being closely connected to nature. The Wisconsin limestone used inside and out gave a rustic feel, and the soaring windows brought nature inside. The windows, with their cutout pattern of stylized pine trees on plywood, echoed the natural setting. What could have been a rather claustrophobic little cottage certainly was not. Instead, it had a great sense of spaciousness. We had a panoramic view of the trees, bird feeders, and squirrels. In the guest book, we read that some visitors had reported seeing deer right outside as well. The cottage is right at the edge of a steep drop-off toward Mirror Lake, and it's actually located on the Mirror Lake State Park property. The lake is visible from a patio off from the living room, which extends the living space outside the walls of the house, especially nice during summer months. Incidentally, there are 2 pennies embedded in the floor on either side of the fireplace. A 1959 penny was placed there at the wish of Seth Peterson himself to commemorate the year the building was constructed. The other, a 1992 penny, was placed for the year of rehabilitation of the cottage. And there's a tradition for guests to leave a penny somewhere in the building after their visit. So the total cost of rental was $200 plus that 1 penny that I left behind. The house is normally open for tours the second Sunday of each month at a nominal cost. However, I understand tours were suspended during the pandemic, and I'm not sure if they will be reopened this summer or not. It was 12 years later that I stayed at another Frank Lloyd Wright house overnight, namely the Muirhead Farmhouse in Plato Center, Illinois. Rick and I stayed at the Muirhead Farmhouse near Plato Center, which is west of Elgin, for my birthday in April 2008. It was available as a bed and breakfast at the time, but is not currently available for lodging. Occasional tours may be arranged, however, especially for small groups. Entrance to the farm passed under a small railroad trestle, and at night we heard the plaintive, lonely sound of a train whistle and the rumbling of the train as it passed by. Muirhead Farmhouse was the only farmhouse designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and was built in 1950. It looks nothing like your typical Illinois farmhouse. Constructed of red common brick, cypress siding, and concrete, the house is based on a 4-foot grid, which extends to the sidewalk outside as well. The farmhouse is a rather elongated structure in 3 sections. Off to the left, the bedroom wing, the central living room with fireplace, and to the right, a utility wing with kitchen, dining room, laundry area, and an office at the other end. While we were there, we observed the family, mom, dad, and 2 sons, all busy at their laptop computers in the office area. A modern family indeed. Muirhead Farmhouse was and actually still remains a working farm. Mrs. Petersdorf, the woman of the house, is part of the Muirhead family. On the property, we saw the old red barn, a tree-lined pond which invited us to pause and dream, and a yet-to-be restored pickup with the inscription Robert Muirhead, Plato Center on it. Rick and I had a comfortable bedroom at the farmhouse with built-in shelves and cabinets. The windows are placed high enough for privacy, but able to provide ample natural light. The room also included a fireplace and an adjacent patio, neither of which we used during our April visit. Of course, we were free to roam about on the property and to use the living room as well. There is a built-in seating area on one side. Wright liked to feature built-in furniture and lots of pillows to match the Cherokee red of the floor. The seating focused on a large central fireplace, which Wright always considered the heart of the home, a great gathering place for family and guests. And there were floor-to-ceiling windows that connected to nature on the outside and provided a great view of the lawn. Incidentally, there's also a great view from the outside to the inside, as we would soon discover. Sitting in the living room that evening, with our backs to the windows, Rick suddenly sensed that we were being watched. Is there no privacy here? We looked outside and saw a curious raccoon standing up against the window to check out the human visitors. He was just inches away from us. The next morning, we enjoyed a very satisfying breakfast with eggs and fresh fruit served up by Mike Petersdorf, his wife being away for outside employment. Today, fruits and vegetables from the farm are available weekly at the Batavia Farmers Market each Saturday from June through October. But finally, we had to leave this relaxing country paradise and head back to the city. It would be another 11 years before we lodged at another Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Elam House in Austin, Minnesota. Austin is largely a blue-collar town, sometimes dubbed Spam Town, USA. It's the site of the huge Hormel flagship meatpacking plant and the quirky Spam Museum, which, of course, we visited while there. It was August 2019 that Rick and I stayed at the Frank Lloyd Wright designed house, the Elam House in Austin, Minnesota. This visit came at the end of a memorable 16-day trip of a lifetime that took us to 7 sites of the National Park Service in the states of North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota. The trip, which we had long anticipated, was full of many adventures. One highlight of our trip was staying at the Old Faithful Inn at Yellowstone, designed by architect Robert Reamer, sometimes considered the father of national parks architecture. It was not Frank Lloyd Wright, but was certainly organic and rustic, qualities Wright might have admired, if not approved of. Our room's dormer window is shown within the red circle. When we checked in at the Old Faithful Inn, we were told we would be staying in the Robert Reamer room, which the architect himself had inhabited for a time. So that was certainly a highlight of our trip. How could we end this amazing trip with an appropriate finale? 4 nights later, we'd stay at the Elam House in Austin, Minnesota. But this was my secret for our final night out, which Rick didn't know anything about. As we approached Austin, I told Rick that we'd be staying that night at a Holiday Inn. Oh, how exciting can that be, he thought. Really? We had the GPS zeroed in on the address I'd provided, and we drove into a beautiful wooded residential area, and Rick was convinced that somehow we'd entered the wrong address. I told him to just keep on driving. We soon arrived at the Elam house, and I said, "Well, here we are." Rick was more than surprised, exclaiming, "This ain't no Holiday Inn." But he was quite happy to discover my trickery. He'd soon discovered that this was much more memorable than any Holiday Inn or motel. The Elam house, built for a jewelry store operator, was completed in 1951. It is one of the largest Usonian houses designed by Wright. It features towering limestone piers, floor-to-ceiling fireplaces, and white cypress trim with more than 100 windows to connect with nature on the large wooded lot. The house contains 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. The owner, Peter Plunkett, gave us a 1-hour tour of the house and surrounding landscape, during which we witnessed a deer and 2 fawns prancing through the property. And one very curious old owl who stared at us for quite some time. Maybe you've heard this poem by Edward Percy Richards. A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we all be like that bird? The wildlife and spacious lawn contributed to our sense of being in a masterpiece, both natural and architectural. The portion of the house open for rental is about 820 square feet, which includes a living room with great views through plenty of large windows, which makes the space seem even more spacious. A bedroom with a seating area. Notice the generous use of white cypress. And a double bed with indirect lighting. Notice the limestone that you saw on the outside follows through on the inside as well. An adjacent bathroom with 2 sinks. In this case, we call them his and his sinks. A small kitchenette with dining area. Since I had lived near Austin for 10 years, I suggested that we should go out to the Old Mill, a quaint and popular restaurant by the Cedar River, to eat. The house glowed with light and beauty even at night, and welcomed us back after enjoying dinner. After a long day of travel and adventure, it was soon bedtime in this very special Frank Lloyd Wright house. Rick and I were quite happy not to be staying at a Holiday Inn. We enjoyed a much-needed good night's rest. Why might you want to stay overnight at the Frank Lloyd Wright house? This quote from the New York Times sums it up well. A Frank Lloyd Wright house is like a Japanese garden. No matter where inside you stand or which way you turn, the view before your eyes has been planned, and planned to be harmonious and beautiful. To absorb it and try to understand how it was done, you need to move and pause and double back and look around again, stand and sit, and maybe lie on the couch. Well, I've stayed at only 3 Frank Lloyd Wright houses and probably won't make it to the other 9 or 10, including this one in Hawaii. But each one has impressed me with the quality of materials, the natural setting, and the way indoors and outdoors are visually and materially unified. Wright designed some amazing houses, both large and small, and it's been my privilege to spend a little time in 3 of them. I encourage you to do the same if you have the time and opportunity. Finally, I thank you for allowing me to share these personal memories with you. I hope you've enjoyed this little tour and learned why I appreciate Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture so very much. Thank you.